Jedes Mädel unserer Zeit hat eine eigene Tätigkeit. Lilli, die schreibt Bücher. Die Tilly, die malt Bücher. Grete Müller ist Dentist. Paula Hiller ist Jurist. Anna Stiller predigt. Erledigt jedoch. Die Susi bläst das Saxophon. Die Susi hat den richtigen Ton. Sie macht eine feine Musik. Die Susi spielt so wundervoll, mal süß in Dur, mal weich im Mond. Die Susi hat die Sache raus, sie kennt sich aus. Wenn der Arbeitstag vorbei, treiben sie so allerlei. Lilli küsst den Edi, die Tilly knutscht mit Fredi. Grete sitzt mit Max beim Sekt, Paula wird mit Fritz perfekt. Annemarie will's wissen, beim Küssen jedoch. Die Susi bläst das Saxophon, die Susi hat den richtigen Ton, sie macht ne feine Musik. Die Susi spielt so wundervoll, mal süß in Dur, mal weich im Mond. Die Susi hat die Sache raus, sie kennt sich aus. Die Susi. Die Susi hat die Sache raus, sie kennt sich aus.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the 39th limited edition of the Giornate del Cinema Muto Pordenone Silent Film Festival. Thank you for joining us. Before we go into the evening, I just want to remind people that if anyone is having technical problems, they should be writing in the chat feature on the bottom right of the screen or emailing the helpline directly, because hopefully we'll be able to solve some of the issues that you might be having. So let's get on with the evening and the film. I'm very happy to be able to introduce this evening two guests with us. The first is Stefan Drößler from the Filmmuseum Munich.
Hello.
Hello, Stefan. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Great. And also Mauro Colombis, the wonderful musician who just accompanied us, and he's joining us at a very early hour from Sydney, Australia.
Hello, everyone. In fact, good morning.
Thank you, Mauro, for joining at this difficult hour, perhaps. I'd like to launch right in. In the 1990s, when there was a Pabst retrospective, Martin Koeber wrote that this film is basically forgotten in the Pabst canon. And I don't think that all that much has really changed since then. It still is something that's not talked about very much. It's not addressed. The films before are very much so, and the films after. But this falls into a kind of hole. And Stefan, I'd like to hear your thoughts on why you think that is.
Oh, well, there were very spectacular films Pabst did before and after. Films with big budgets, like The Loves of Janai was a film he did immediately before Abwege, and then he did the two films with Louise Brooks. And Abwege was a very cheap and small production. It was one of these contingent films which were produced in Germany and distributed just by the distributors. Here it was Deutsche Universal, just to be able to import an American big movie to do the money. So they gave a little money to German filmmakers to do films, and this was one of these small films. So it is more like a Kammerspiel compared to the other big titles of Pabst, and it is a very cold film, I would say. So you don't come very close to the characters. It's not easy to identify yourself with one of the characters. And it is not one of these grandiose panoramic view on a society. It is very concentrated on few characters. So it is atypical for the image the people have of Pabst, and this is one of the reasons, I guess.
And yet, even though I agree with you, it is a Kammerspiel, it's much more contained. At the same time, Brigitte Helm's character fits in a very interesting way into the panorama, shall we say, of female characters that Pabst was bringing to the screen at this time. Her sexuality, her ambivalence towards her sexuality, the sexuality, of course, of the people around her, of a particular moment in Berlin in the cabaret culture of 1928, I think is very, speaks to us very much now. With the fascination that so many of us have about Weimar culture at that time, you feel like you've entered into a Georg Gross painting when you're watching the film, particularly in that cabaret sequence.
Yes, it's interesting. When I got interest to restore this film again, because this film was never lost, it was always around, and fortunately it is one of the camera necks which are existing. We don't know exactly if it is maybe only the B negative or the A negative. Because of Janai, we know there were two negatives at least. Here we have only this one negative with flash titles, which could indicate that it was more a negative for the foreign market. But the problem was always that some of the intertitles were missing, especially in the second part of the film. So you never knew really what was going on in the trial. It was not that necessary to have the intertitles, because most of the conversation in this film is non-verbal conversation. But on the other hand, the few titles are very essential. So I was very happy when I found the screenplay during researches at the Cinémathèque Française. It was registered under a different title, and it was a real screenplay, but the pages of this nightclub scene, there was only written, these were 3 empty pages. It was only written El Dorado, this is the name of the nightclub. So I was very disappointed because it is one of the key scenes of the film, of course. And then there was another manuscript, 10 pages, just describing this nightclub scene with much more details and more explicit than it is in the final film. So there are dialogues about cocaine and so on, but not in direct speech, in indirect speech. We could see which are the dialogues for the film, but you could see that somehow this scene was very central for Pabst. I guess, this is my interpretation, that this scene was maybe written later, and a lot of concentration was gone on this particular scene, which is very important for the film. And of course, when you describe the film as a document of Berlin in the 20s, everything is focusing on this very long sequence where you have everything. You have gay people, you have drug addicts, you have transvestites going around in this scene. But the film is a little more, I think, than this one scene.
I'm glad you mentioned the fact that the intertitles, there's not all that much conversation in it. And Mauro, I wonder, in terms of the intertitles, how does that help you, or does that hurt you when you're thinking about how to compose for the film, how to accompany the film? The fact that the intertitles aren't giving you all that much conversation, how does that affect your conception of the music?
For this particular film, I didn't have any interference from the fact there were not many intertitles. There were some intertitles because so, for instance, at the beginning when I received the file to work with, I didn't have the English translation, but I watched the film, so without really understanding the intertitles, and so for the first time I basically work without knowing exactly the meaning of the intertitles, so which in some way can answer your question. So when I got the English intertitles, the English translation, I didn't change much what I had already in my mind and what I had already prepared.
It couldn't have been a particularly easy film. I was thinking as I was listening to your playing, because of course, as Stefan was saying, that central nightclub scene is such a standalone piece. And yet you have to create all of the atmosphere that leads up to it, which can be slow, and you have to continue it afterwards. So how do you modulate? How do you, I mean, there were moments when I felt that you were completely enchanted with Brigitte Helm's character, and why not? Because you just watch this woman move, and you can't help but just be in awe of her physical presence. There's a grace and an elegance which I think you capture beautifully in the music. But how do you build something up to a scene that becomes this a monument in a sense in the middle, and then also continue something that's still meaningful afterwards?
Well, yes, so the scene El Dorado has some components of. First of all, it's basically real life in some way, where I had to see. I saw the musician, the band playing, and so basically, apart from the drama that is in Brigitte's life, I had to consider all the context around. So people having fun, people exaggerating, people simply having fun and dancing. And then we have the other character, the very lost girl, let's say, the temptation for Irene. And we have some other characters, the boxer, and and the other guy with glasses, I don't know exactly his name at the moment, but yes, the rich one. So basically, when I had to play the music for this long scene, I had to make sometimes decisions. Sometimes I just tried to keep a sort of dancing party carpet, but in the same time, I try also to depict each character in a particular way. So I try to give a theme or leitmotiv for all the characters I've mentioned before. But yes, in my mind, I try to have the fundamentals of the whole music and the whole scene in the rhythm of the party life of the El Dorado nightclub.
Stefan, you began to talk about the restoration, and I'd like to get back to that. It was very nice in the introduction to the Film Museum, because we had a chance to see Eno Patalas, who many of our public knew very well, of course, and was a regular attendee at the Giornate. And I know that this was the initial restoration, if I understand correctly, was a project that he began. Is that correct?
Yes, but we also have to say, and this is always important for me, that the founding director of our museum was Rudolf Joseph. And Joseph was befriended with Pabst. So he was the one who got a collection of Pabst screenplays and documents and a lot of photos, and especially the handwritten screenplay for The Joyless Street. This was acquired already by Rudolf Joseph, and he did a big Pabst exhibition in the mid-60s. So Enno was the second director who started with a restoration of the Pabst films. And he liked very much Abwege and did a first restoration. But the restoration meant mainly he found out that there was a negative in the former GDR film archive, which had survived from the original collection of the Reichsfilm archive. But one reel was missing. This reel could be added from a print which was preserved at the Cinematheque Suisse. And then he tried to put the intertitles in, but he had no indication. He found some flash titles, as I mentioned, and he retranslated some of the French titles from prints he could acquire. And so this was the first restoration. Later in the late 90s, after the Pabst retrospective in Berlin, there was another restoration initiated by Arte Television. They put they changed some of the intertitles, and then the Bundesarchive did a new negative, and fortunately they didn't destroy the nitrate, as they sometimes did, but gave it instead to the Filmarchive Austria. We had this now very well stored, and so we could use it for this restoration. In fact, the scanning was done from the Filmarchive Austria, and we cared for the image restoration, and then for this very difficult task to decide about the intertitles. But now with the screenplay, we had a good document which mentioned most of the titles, but we were not sure that these titles were all really used in the final film. So we compared all the prints we could get. We had a print from France, from Belgium, even a Czech print, and retranslated the titles, and then we could see if they were very close to the titles from the screenplay. We checked the film, there were jump cuts where titles were in. So finally, I would say we know about more than 90% of the titles that they are now absolutely exact in the wording. And then there are a few questions on two titles where we don't know exactly if there's not one word maybe different, but I think we made it as good as possible. And of course, since we had this brilliant image material, we spent a lot of time to remove all the scratches, little scratches which were in the material, to have it looking like a pristine print. And okay, the color, we did tinting. We knew that the film was tinted, at least at the premiere in Berlin. It was premiered not in Berlin, but in Hamburg first. But when it was shown in Berlin, there's at least one report which is directly that the film was tinted. So we created the tints by ourselves after some indications, but most of the tints decisions by us. So
and you said after some, but you did have some indications. Where did the indications come from?
No, we had only indications that we could see which scenes are very similar, and so we looked which are the different milieus to describe them, and we knew that the tinting in the late 20s was different from tintings in the early 20s or in the teens, so we did this very decent tinting. The tinting is mentioned in an article in Close Up, where the reviewer says that the film was shown in London. It was cut, like in all the other countries. They were all censored. Even the titles were sometimes censored. And he mentions that it is a different film, especially because it was tinted in Berlin and was only shown black and white in London. This was a reason for us to think about the tinting.
I'm glad you brought up the English premiere and the article in Close Up, which is extraordinary, and as almost all of the articles in Close Up are amazing, and an incredible source. But the film was released in the UK with the title Crisis, and somewhere along the line there's this notion that the film has another English language title of The Devious Path, which I mentioned actually in my introduction. And doing a little bit of research, we're not quite sure really where that comes from, because it doesn't appear that the film was ever released in the United States. So I don't know if you have any.
I think it was in one of, it was mentioned in an article in one of the American film magazines. But I think Crisis is a more, the title which was used more even in other countries. In Italy, it was called Crisi, and all the other countries used translations of the title Crisis. So I think this title was only mentioned in an American article or review, so I would not take it. But somebody used it when the film was shown after the war in America, and yeah, well, so now we have these two English titles.
Yeah, and one of which seems to have not really be a release title, so it's a bit confusing, I think, and we probably shouldn't be using it anymore. Also, I think it's a terrible title. Crisis is much better. Astray is the proper English translation for the word Abwege, which I think is also an interesting comment on where the female character is going. Crisis is also maybe even less condemnatory, which I think is also interesting. Mauro, there was a moment in the music in the dance club also there with the dancers. There's a wonderful moment at the very beginning, the first dancers that you see, and she's looking directly at us. There's a sense of really, she's looking in the camera, the dancer, and there's really a sense of our being a part of this, that we too are the spectator, we too are the voyeur. And you play different kinds of music with her then, and then later on they do this bizarre dance where he's wearing spurs and you're not quite sure, is it Argentinian? What's it supposed to be? I was curious about the music choices you made then.
Okay, so I didn't have any, how to say, source to know what kind of music they they were dancing. So the only clue I had was this the shot at the band. After we see there is an accordion, a clarinet, a violin, and a drum kit. So in my opinion, if there was an accordion, it's very likely that at a certain point they played very likely some tango music. But I'm not also a dance expert, so but I don't think that there are scenes where you can see people dancing tango. And anyway, so I thought that the two dancers in both occasions when we see them, they play something exotic in terms of, when I say exotic, it's something not local. So I thought maybe some kind of Oriental flavor or even Eastern European flavor. So that's my thought when I had to decide which kind of music to use in both occasions.
And then it's also wonderful when she's being lured, in a sense, by the cocaine addict. You go very minimal and almost sort of magical notes that are used that very much convey this sense of attraction, very powerful, practically magical attraction, which I found very powerful.
Yes, what I thought there was just a little bit like being attracted by something particularly, how to say, something good, sweet, but in the same time dangerous. So I wanted to depict a sort of dream-like atmosphere where she feels okay, but in the same time she gets a little bit going down and down, abandoning herself to the night. And I think basically she's only tried to escape her feelings. In the end, she's not trying to behave badly. She's only trying to enjoy her life, find happiness in some way. And so I thought that moment for me was her dream. And I wanted to play music that could show this dream in her mind and her feelings.
No, and you do it very well. And Stefan, I was thinking about the relationship of Pabst with the camera, with the cinematographer Theodor Sparkul, because it's quite. There are several wonderful moments of a sort of freedom of the camera entering into the body of the crowds in a very loose and modern way. What do we know about their relationship as a professional relationship? Obviously, is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we don't know much, especially I don't know much. Sparkul was famous because he did all the big Lubitsch films, the last Lubitsch films from Madame du Barry, Anna Boleyn, The Loves of Pharaoh, but also this little game, the last film Lubitsch did in Germany, Die Flamme, which I like very much. It unfortunately survives only as a fragment. And it's Abwege is the only film he did with Pabst. So we cannot talk about a relationship which lasted longer, or where we can compare it with other films to develop something out of it. But I think in this film you can see beautiful how he puts the right light into all these characters, and you can see in this film also that always something is happening in the backgrounds, and this very precise editing, as we find very often in the Pabst films. It is so precise that all the movements in the background fit together. When we restore such films, and sometimes we care for films where I have to look for continuity and to put shots together, And I find very few films which are so precise, like here in these Pabst films. And it is also in the films he did before and after. But here in this small story, everything is so concentrated, and you can look at it and you can feel it, how precise everything is done. So I think there was a strong collaboration, but I cannot say more, or I don't have more background information. But maybe
no, and I also,
yeah.
No, I was just going to say, and I also think about his work, Sparkle's work with Arthur Robinson, The Informer and such, which are also extraordinary films. Yeah.
But I maybe should add something to your former question about why the film was or is so forgotten. You have to see that this film was not successful at the time. When you read all the old reviews from the premiere, it is mentioned that the people were laughing about the film. Especially the scene when Brigitte Helm is letting her husband in and standing there half naked. It is said that the audience was loud laughing because they didn't understand this scene. I think it was not easy for the people at the time to understand this character. And so, and they were very used. They went into this movie to see Brigitte Helm, and Brigitte Helm was the vamp in the German silent cinema. You may know that she was always protesting and even on strike against UFA because she didn't want to play always the vamp. So this should be a film which was a little closer to her, to change her image, but the audience was expecting the vamp and not such a complicated character played by Brigitte Helm. And this is my explanation why this was such a disaster. Okay, the film was shown in many cinemas because it had the star names, but it was not successful with the audience, so it didn't get long runs in the theaters. And I think the expectations of the audience were different. And the film is so modern that at the time nobody could understand it. Today, when we have a different point of view, we can see how this woman tries to break out of her role. You see all these weak men around who cannot communicate with her. She is looking for something which these men cannot offer to her. So, but at the time, this was obviously a little too much for the people.
Do we know anything about how it was received in France, for example, and some of the other countries where it opened? You also mentioned that it was a print found in the Czech Republic and in Switzerland. And I was wondering if maybe the French audiences had a better understanding of the film or warmed to it more.
I don't know. But of course, Pabst was much more appreciated in France. He was seen as one of the great authors of the German cinema. You know that he later, in the beginning of the sound era, was even producing in France, and even his first big film, The Joyless Street, was immediately released also in France. There was some Russian money which came via France to the German production company of Joyless Street, Sofa Films in Berlin, which was run by Pabst. So it was, Pabst was a name in France, but I have no clue how this particular film was received. I only can talk in general about the reception of Pabst in France.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Pabst, I wonder, could you talk a little bit about the Pabst archive that's at the Filmmuseum Munich, what it contains?
Yeah, well, there are different Pabst archives and Pabst collections. As I said, Rudolf Joseph, at the time in the 60s when the Filmmuseum was opened, there was still a discussion that there should be a central German film archive, so he was not allowed in the very beginning to buy films and to collect films. So he was just looking for screenplays and paper material and photos. At the time, he was also organizing exhibitions. As I said, Pabst, he opened the Filmmuseum with a film by Pabst, The Trial, Der Prozess, which was the first big film Pabst did after the war. And so he was in contact for this exhibition with the family of Pabst, and we have a lot of photos for every film of Pabst, also from the different language versions of the first sound films. And we have the screenplays for many of his early films. There's another Pabst collection in Austria. They have material to the late films by Pabst, which were shot in Austria and very close to the family of Pabst. And there's also a Pabst collection in Berlin at the Kinemathek, partly with the same photos we have. So they bought it later. It's not that long ago, so I don't know, 30 years after the Munich collection came to us, which was, so they bought also things which were in the family. And when you do research on Pabst, you have to go to the three institutions and to see how the documents fit. And as I said, the Cinémathèque Française are also material about Pabst. I was very surprised to find this screenplay, because we have screenplays of Secrets of a Soul or of Joyless Street, but not to this particular film. And I didn't know that a screenplay existed. There are still there's still a lot of work to do on Pabst films. The Joyless Street is maybe the most censored film in film history. There is not any print which is like the original length. Our restoration is also missing at least 20 minutes and has very poor image quality. We are working on it now for decades and still got some new results by working digitally on some of the worst pieces of this print. There's also Secrets of a Soul, where I'm very I found some material which is not in the longest print, which is our restoration. And I think this is a so important film that we really have to work on it soon, and to add the little pieces which explain this psychoanalysis things a little more, and which were cut out later. Even the ending is not complete. So there's still a lot of work to do with Pabst, and fortunately we have at least the screenplays to these two titles and can imagine what is missing. It's always very difficult to find out what is missing. Even here in this film Abwege, we have censorship lengths, which is 50 meters longer than the length of this digital restoration. When we put the lengths back into meters, then there's still something missing, but there's also another censorship file, German censorship file, which is shorter than our version. So what is our version? Maybe it is B negative for the foreign countries. We have no indication how to identify if really this image is like the other image. But from knowing the two versions of The Loves of Jeanne Nye, we have prints from the A negative and the B negative. Maybe there were even a C or D negative, who knows. But we have prints of the two negatives, and in this case, these two versions are very much the same. It's just a slightly little bit image from a slightly different point of view. It means that here we can see that the editing of Pabst, which is so perfect, doesn't allow to do a second editing in a different style or with different shots. And so if there would be two negatives of Abwege, then I would think that the second negative is not that much different from the first negative, so we can be very sure that we are very close to what the people have seen at the premiere in Germany. But it is a very difficult case because we don't have all the negatives and all the material to be sure.
Mauro, because Weimar cinema is such a popular theme in retrospectives and film museums and all of that, I imagine that you've played quite a lot of German silent films over the years. And I'm wondering, I don't know if you've played for Abwege before, and if not, or even if you have, how do you see it fitting into what your conception is as a musician, and also as somebody who knows silent film so well, into that general picture of German film from that period?
Well, I have not actually accompanied a lot of some silent films from that period, but yeah, I think this is a film that shows well, no, the idea of this period in Germany. I think historically, no, before the before the Nazi came, we had a different Germany, and with let's say, some people find this period free libertines, but I think in the end, from the point of view of music, I consider these films very inspiring from the point of view of giving the sense of freedom in the arts, freedom in behaviors, and without being too judgmental in this film especially.
Mm-hmm. And how does that influence, knowing all of that, how does that influence your musical style?
The style in this film, well, I tried to express more than just in a natural way, just the feelings between the persons, and especially between the Irene and Thomas. So in the end, I felt free to get the music to express the kind of relationship between also the Irene and the painter, and all the other characters, and her friend. In my opinion, I tried just to color the music in a way. It seems very, how to say, it's full of I don't know how to express this concept. Very sensual. So I tried to give a sensual color to all the situation, except for, of course, the situation where instead the tension between Irene and Thomas, for instance, when they are in the limbo, the relationship doesn't seem to go anywhere. But all the other time where she flirts, or where she tries also to conquer the attention of her husband, I try to build up sensuality in music. That's was I think the inspiration I got from this film, and I try to be, yes, to get it out without control, let's say.
You know, I think you did it very well. Sensuality and sympathy for her too, which comes through both in the film and in the music that you played for it. Stefan, I was struck when you were just speaking before. You said that the Film Museum opened with one of Pabst's films, one of the films that he made after the war. And wasn't that something of a bold choice? Because at that moment, Pabst's reputation was, particularly for the films that he made in the, let's say, by the late 30s, well, particularly after the war, was uncertain. It had declined. So the fact that the Film Museum chose, your predecessor chose, to open the museum with a film that was made after the war, when his, as I say, his career, his reputation was down, I think was quite a startling decision, no?
Well, I would say that, but when I see the reviews, nobody criticized the Film Museum for opening with his film. This film was regarded as an important film about anti-Semitism. So it is said it was a film with which Pabst tried to define his position, even while he was working in Nazi Germany and doing 2 films for UFA. But the film Der Prozess was undoubtedly regarded internationally as a good film against anti-Semitism, so there was no question about it. It was a good choice. I think nobody, when the exhibition was done, they even produced a little booklet with a lot of texts of people who worked with Pabst. Rudolf Joseph, who was in exile in America and worked with Douglas Sirk in America, with many people he knew from Germany, and then he came back to Munich to prepare the Film Museum and to open it. He was an émigré, and for him it was important to make some of the people he knew who were his friends, to bring them to closer attention to the public. And at this time it was not so political that somebody was criticizing his choice. This started in the late 60s, especially with Enno Patalas and some of these left-winged film critics who said that he is not caring for modern film, not for the new cinema, for the young filmmakers. And so they were always writing very critical articles about the Film Museum. They didn't realize that Pabst was also promoting Michelangelo Antonioni, who got a prize in Munich in 1967, and Rudolf Joseph. These were the first prints he bought, were all the early films of Antonioni, which we have, all his short films in our collection. So it was a strange situation. But he was not criticized for caring for Pabst and for this political career of Pabst. At this time, this was not the discussion. The discussion was that his director was old and was not caring for the experiments of the young filmmakers, the young German filmmakers. And it's a quite sad story. That is the reason why I always try to mention Rudolf Joseph. When he was retiring after 10 years of leading the Film Museum, he left his office, went back to America, and never heard, there was never a contact between him and the Film Museum anymore. There was only one letter, and he wrote to the secretary that he forgot a piece of his desk, something like a pencil, to send it to him. That was all. Enno Patalas never mentioned him. He was totally against this old guy, and Rudolf Joseph was nearly forgotten. When Chris Horak came, who did these studies about German film exile in America, they tried to invite Rudolf Joseph to Germany, but he was not able to travel anymore, so they sent a filmmaker to Los Angeles to make an interview with Rudolf Joseph. And this is the last document we have of him sitting in the home, talking about how he, about his life and how he opens a film museum. And when he talks about Munich in front of the camera, he starts to cry because it was such a hurtful experience that he had to go, and that's the biggest critic of him. Enno Patalas became his the next director, and that's then all the connections were broken. But okay, this is something of our own history. I don't want to go too far away from Pabst.
No, but I think it's important that we talk about this too, because it sounds like he had a clear impact on cinephilia, cinema going at that time, and then was pushed out for various reasons, which I think is fascinating. Are you planning on doing any work on Rudolf Joseph, or do you know people who are?
Yeah, well, we did. When we had our anniversary, our 50th anniversary, we published a booklet, and it was Chris Horak who wrote an article about Rudolf Joseph, and of course we try to see him as a founding director, and I'm quite happy that we found even some film documents from the 60s, as you could see in this little film about the Film Museum, where, yes, I think he deserves to be mentioned, and you can see what programs he did, and so he has also, he's as important as Enno Patalas later was, but Enno Patalas, of course, was a character who could sell himself very well, and so everybody knows Enno Patalas. And even today I get letters addressed to Enno Patalas.
Big personalities, yeah.
But I wanted to mention maybe something going back to Abwege. I liked in Abwege, as I said, Brigitte Helm. She is an actress I always like. Okay, she is maybe not so elegant in her acting. She is a little strange, but I think it's very interesting to see her films and even her minor films. One of the films I'm always looking for that it will be preserved one day is Manolescu, where the film where she meets Ivan Moshukin, the only film the two did together, with this wonderful scene when they meet together in the train. But I also want to say something about the other actors in the film we saw. I think the quality of Abwege is also that these are actors which Pabst used also in other films, so he was very familiar with them. Harter von Walter you can see in at least three other silent films by Pabst, Joyless Street, or The Love of Janai, or Jack Trevor, who was also in The Loves of Janai and Secrets of a Soul. So all these actors did work very close with Pabst. But there's this one lady which I always think is very fascinating, who is playing this drug addict, Ilse Bachmann. And I think she is very interesting and very powerful in this nightclub scene. But I couldn't find out what really happened to her. She only showed up in 3 films in 1928 and 29, and we don't know more about her. And I really would like to find out more about her. So if somebody now is watching us and knows more about Ilse Bachmann, I would be delighted to learn more about her.
No, she is indeed. She's very effective in the film, and of course Mauro brings that out very, very nicely. We have a comment by Ivo Blom, who is interested in that you had mentioned Antonioni, Stefan, because he sees a parallel between Deserto Rosso in some themes of Abwege, the cold husband, the impotent lover, the woman who doesn't know what to choose. So that's a sort of nice thing also to bridge the two.
This is interesting, but I think I cannot bring these two things together, that Rudolf Joseph, at the time when he did this Pabst exhibition, Abwege was not in the program. So I'm not sure that he even knew Abwege. But nevertheless, this is really interesting to bring these two films in a context clear. I never thought about it.
Ultimately, the universal themes. I mean, even I was thinking, particularly when I viewed it this time, the very final scene is very similar to the 1939 Mitchell Lyson film Midnight, when they walk out of the divorce court together after they've just been divorced. That really came through. I'm not suggesting that Mitchell Lyson had seen Abwege, although he might have. But that would have been 11 years earlier, and I don't know that that would have stuck in his mind. But it's always nice to make these little parallels without knowing where they're really going.
Yeah, well, of course it is. Well,
I see we're coming up just about to the hour mark, so I want to thank you both very much for joining us this evening, for being a part of our limited edition. It means a lot that you're here. So, Stefan, thank you very much. And
yes.
Mauro, thank you very much for joining. And see everybody hopefully tomorrow for Romance of the Redwoods, Cecil B. DeMille starring Mary Pickford. See you tomorrow.
Okay, see you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And good morning.
Bye. Good night.
Yes, good morning.
Yeah, don't know what to do. Stay or go to sleep.